There's some people. So I see Nick. Hey, everybody. Nick, can you knock? Oh, there's Jason. Now we're rolling.
Hello, what's happening?
How are you doing?
Very good. Everything okay?
Yeah, we're live, by the way. We're recording. We have some guests here on the side. Do you see in the chat? Nick's over there. Oh,
I see the chat. Yes, hang on.
and Nick is now on, and we have a couple people in the audience, so we're about to get started.
All right.
I don't know why my camera is looking so close up, but
You're close up. Wow, you're really close. There's Nick. What's happening, man?
What's going on, my people?
How are you? You good?
I'm good, man. How about you?
Everything is good, man. Everything is good. All right. So you ready to get going?
yeah, let's do it.
All right, here we go.
So we have here. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Now we're good? All right, here we go. So we're here now to break down some of the biggest legal stories going on in the world of sports this week. We're going to kick things off with what happened this week in Major League Baseball and the trial of Eric Kay, former Angel executive who was convicted of supplying fentanyl to the late Tyler Skaggs. It was a very fast trial. He's going to be sentenced coming up in June, and he faces a minimum of 20 years in prison. And, you know, the first thing that strikes me about this, Amy, is that usually a trial like this, it goes on for a while. But we saw 5 Major League Baseball players testify. We saw a very quick result. Why did this all happen so fast?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, I was watching the documentary last night, OJ Made in America. I'm a little bit late to the game on that one.
A little bit,
but
sure.
the trial took 267 days, which was mind blowing. And they had those jurors sequestered in a hotel away from everybody. This trial, compared to that, it was like lightning speed. The jurors deliberated, I think, for around 3 hours, maybe less than 3 hours, which was surprising. I was shocked that the defense, I think they only put on 1 day of testimony, maybe a day and a half. And that's really surprising. To me, it always seemed like a weak case because they had so much evidence against this guy, Kay, in terms of, the amount of messages between him and other drug suppliers. They were able to create a nexus between the drug deals actually happening at Angel Stadium. And there were traces of drugs found in his office. They had emails that he had used from his company email address to get involved with these suppliers and get drugs to then distribute to the players. And then, Jason, as you mentioned, they had all of these players testify that he was their main source of supply, for some of them, the only source of supply. And some of them said that they had met him through Tyler Skaggs. So to me, this just seemed like, a home run case for the prosecution. I wasn't surprised by what had happened. But what I am surprised about is the fact that not more people are talking about what is the Angels' liability as an organization, because many of the drug dealing episodes that went down and the distribution of the drugs to the players happened during work hours on work premises by an employee of the organization.
Nick, is this something where, you heard all the players testify? Matt Harvey put Percocets in Tyler Skaggs' locker. And is it, taking me inside the locker room, are things like this that happen, are they that much, are they ever hidden? Or is it like stuff could be out in the open? It doesn't need to be about drugs. It could be about other stuff. Like, is that stuff that, hey, like you get snippets and bits and pieces of what's going on around you? Or is this more, hey, if something like this is happening, it's a little bit more clandestine?
Well, basically, guys, how it typically happens, if you see a guy who's performing well, everyone is looking up to that player. Okay, but what was the added thing that gave you that boost to kind of get over the hump? And players talk. It's like, hey, I'm using this new power drink and it's giving me a lot of energy. So now other guys want to use it. In this case, when we look at Matt Harvey and we look at Tyler Skaggs, it was a case of, hey, I'm dealing with some kind of pain. Now they're giving us Percocet, oxycodone, and now other players are saying, okay, well, I can get that from you, and I don't have to actually go to a trainer to actually get it, that starts the snowball effect downhill. And what we're not really talking about, and it's not really being talked about on a national scale, is the problem with baseball. We all know about the steroid era and how many people were aware of what was going on. And it's like we go along to get along. And if you're not one of the guys who are taking the steroids, then you're on the outs and you could snitch on us. To me, I see it the same way when it comes to a situation like this. And where is the accountability? I know Eric Kay was the guy who was convicted, but Matt Harvey, you were Skaggs' teammate. You knew he was doing this, and there were multiple players that testified against Eric Kay. And I'm not dismissing Eric Kay for what he did, but what I'm saying is here is where's the accountability on the player? Because I know if I know that a certain player is taking something that I know that he shouldn't take, and it could be deadly, I'm going to step to that player and I'm going to say, man, you should not do this. But it just seemed as though there was no accountability in this situation. And unfortunately, whether it was from, the Angels players, Matt Harvey being one of those guys, or other people within the Angels organization, there's a lot of accountability that needs to go around. And it's not just Eric Kay.
I mean, how about the fact that they had Eric Kay working for the organization for decades, and they all knew within the organization, people at the highest levels, that he had a serious drug problem. He was in and out of rehab. So you're telling me that he's supplying drugs to multiple players within the organization, and none of the executives know about this? I mean, there was a point in the case where one of the family members, I believe, it was either of Kay or Skaggs, said that they had reported to the organization that there was drug distribution by Eric Kay to people within the organization. How does a person like this get allowed to work for a Major League Baseball organization and be in such close proximity with the players when he has a well-known drug habit?
Yeah, it gets baffling at times, but when we open the pot on this and say, okay, look at what's going on. I mean, you had these players testify because they got, they were able to strike a deal of immunity. And like, that's why Matt Harvey talked. And look, there's been a lot about him. Look, other players on the stand, but Harvey, very high profile, his former days with the Mets. This is like you opened up Pandora's box. You see what's inside. It's like, oh, whoa. This seems like it could be something that is much more easily attainable by anybody. And it's like, wait, let's put that lid back on, because we don't want this to get any further. So I can see where you can ask questions like that, and in the end, it's going to be, well, we're going to close this up because we don't want this to go further. We want this to seem like this was isolated. It was these players in this time, and now we'll get into this with the Dallas Cowboys, but it's kind of like we want this to end now, and we want to go forward. We want to put that lid back on top of it.
Well, I'm also wondering,
go ahead,
like,
Amy.
if Kay wasn't supplying the drugs, do you think the players just would have gotten the drugs from somebody anyway? Because there's a link here, Nick, as you were talking about, to performance enhancement, or at least to be able to cope with injuries. Like, Nick, this is actually really interesting, but I was talking to a former NFL player who shall remain nameless the other day, who said that, stretching as far back as the 2000s, and so, Nick, you would know this, the early 2000s, that every player in the NFL, this is a broad sweeping statement, tell me if this is true, but almost every player in the NFL had to have Toradol in order to go into the game, because the 7-day schedule, it's not enough time to heal the body from the injuries that are sustained and the hits that are sustained in the game. Maybe 10 days would be, but 7 days is not. And now you've got the Thursday games too. So Toradol was like, everybody was being shot up with it, something that Antonio Brown had mentioned lately. Is that the case?
Well, that is the, I guess, anti-inflammatory of choice was Toradol. I can tell you that I too had a Toradol shot. I was in immense pain. I had a bone bruise and an MCL sprain. And obviously, when you're playing professional sport, there's a lot of pressure on you to actually play, especially if you are a good player and you add value to the offensive, defensive side of the ball. Now, obviously, with anything that you take or inject in your body, there are disclaimers that you have to sign. And for me, that was the first and the last time I did it, because I made a promise to my mom when I became a professional athlete that I would never numb my body up to do anything to go out and play. But, the pressure that's associated with the games. And yeah, I mean, were there long lines of guys who I saw constantly in that line over a 2 or 3 year period? Absolutely. But as a professional athlete, you're trying to feed your family. There's a lot of pressure on you, both on and off the field. But this is where guys have indulged in outside things to help them stay on the field. Some have even talked about, marijuana, using marijuana during our playing days to help them on the field. And I've never done that. As a defender, that, my job was to run into larger men larger than myself, and try to bring them down. And yeah, I had my injuries, but I never once, guys, thought about, taking Toradol more than that one time I took it, or even marijuana. Sometimes things can be used as a crutch or justification as to why a guy is trying to stay on the field. But there are alternative ways to deal with injuries, but it comes down to a decision. Do you want to do that, or do you want to conform to what everyone else is doing?
You want to hear a crazy story involving Eric Kay? I'm sure when they went through his work emails, they found my email, because this is going back about 10 or 12 years. I mean, not for this.
Right.
My dad is a big Yankee fan, and he can't walk long distances because, I got a little bit of health issues. So I was saying, boy, I really would like to get my dad tickets for the Yankee game when they come into town, and I would love to get him a parking pass really close. I didn't know. And one of my friends said, oh, yeah, email Eric Kay. He'll help you. And so, like, for 2 years, when my dad wanted to go to a game, I would email him, and he would email back and would say, great, here you go, like, thanks. He would ask me fantasy football advice, because it was back when I was at NFL Network, and I'd send, like, yeah, sure, start this guy, don't start this guy. So when I saw his name come up, I'm like, oh, God, this is the guy that helped me get tickets for a couple of times. It's just, I've always just can't stop thinking about that when I look back at this story. It's just shocking on just so many levels.
Yeah.
But now that this is, we covered this and still waiting for the sentencing on Eric Kay coming up later on in June. We talked about the Dallas Cowboys situation a few minutes ago, and now this was the big headline of the week. The Cowboys paid over $2 million to 4 former cheerleaders after allegations of voyeurism from a longstanding team executive, Rich Dalrymple. It gets really sordid and seamy. There were reports that while they were changing at an event, Dalrymple was videotaping them with his phone. Other reports that during the draft, he was taking video of Jerry Jones's daughter in the war room. And the Cowboys paid out this money to Dalrymple, who just retired very abruptly after being with the team forever earlier this month. So maybe he knew what was coming, maybe he didn't. But Amy, when this story broke and I saw here's what was settled for $2.5 million, my first thought was, here's a way, again, just like kind of with the Angels, you want to put this, you don't want this to become a big time story, is that here's what you can do when you can cover things up and when there's no physical evidence they were able to ascertain, we can figure things out, we can have a payment settlement and still keep the guy on because he was still working for the Cowboys up until a month ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just raises the larger question of what is the league's responsibility when something happens within the organization of a team? It's not involving an owner and it's not involving a player, but it borders on or maybe incorporates a possible crime. I mean, voyeurism is actually a crime in Texas. It could be charged as a misdemeanor if you are spying on somebody for sexual purposes in a place where they would have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And I think a locker room is one of those places, which begs the question, what was this guy doing in the first place in a women's locker room, right? I mean, he had worked for the organization at that point for a while. He presumably knew where the men's bathroom was. So I think there was absolutely evidence of something. Otherwise, why would they dole out millions of dollars? But the question is now, this was so many years ago. It's been settled. The statute of limitations has probably run out in terms of the voyeurism thing. So is this now something that because of Washington football team scandal, the NFL is going to start investigating and trying to prevent these teams from essentially paying people off to quiet them and maybe try to prevent them from reporting things that could potentially be a crime or that, border on sexual misconduct or voyeurism or all of these more, serious violations in the workplace? Should the NFL get involved in all that and expand its police power?
Well, first of all, we've seen the NFL get involved with a lot of investigations going back to the Washington football team, but we all know what happened with that. Nothing happened to Daniel Snyder or anyone in that organization. The only fall guy was John Gruden due to the emails. So the idea of investigating your own self, that hasn't really worked. You need outside counsel, someone who doesn't really have a dog in the fight, and they're looking to get to the bottom line. When I look at the situation with the Dallas Cowboys, even though it was years ago, we still have an ongoing issue. I mean, we're still talking about culture, whether it was the Angels and Eric Kay, Matt Harvey, and Tyler Skaggs, or we're talking about Washington football team. We're talking about the Brian Flores situation. All this culminates to one point, and it's culture in sports. And the one thing I don't understand about this, guys, is this situation happened, and the Dallas Cowboys said, "Hey, we did an investigation. We found no wrongdoing, but we cannot dispute the fact that our employee, our senior vice president of communications, he in fact had access to the ladies or the cheerleaders locker room where they were changing, but there's no visible evidence." Well, you're saying that you can't dispute it, so you're acknowledging that there was an issue, and then you paid out money to these women, and to boot, you had their significant others sign off on the NDA as well. I'll tell you guys this: I'm a father, I'm a brother, and I'm a husband. There's no way that I'm signing off on something like that where some guy, due to voyeurism, was looking at my wife, my daughter, my sister. As a man, I just find that a huge problem for me. And where's your manhood? Where's your ability to protect your wife when you're signing off on something like this that you will not speak about it publicly?
Well, the thing is, there's two big things off this, and that is Jerry Jones is different from other owners. Obviously, he's more influential. Look, you're obviously getting a lot of credit for the Rams in Los Angeles, but he's someone who's always been loyal to his employees, Cowboys, to a fault. Where when they come in, he has always had their backs on things, even when things get a little out of control. Remember the Josh Brent situation a few years ago? Was driving a car that killed his teammate. And after this happened, he's on the sideline of the game. That's a really tough optic. And there was a lot of controversy over how close he was keeping him with the Cowboys. It was, boy, this guy, you know what happened, right? This is difficult. But this is Jerry Jones. And I'm sure Rich Dalrymple's been with the team forever, been the communications director there for a long, long time. Okay, let's see what we can figure out here. So that's Jerry Jones being loyal. But the other part of it is, go back. You mentioned Daniel Snyder. And when all of this came out with the Washington football team, Jerry Jones was very vocal saying, no, he should not be removed as owner. Now, maybe Jerry Jones knew that, okay, if this ever gets out, he doesn't want to get opposition against him and say, yes, let's get rid of Daniel Snyder. And when it comes time for him, okay, let's get rid of Jerry Jones now. That's why it's so difficult to remove owners, because they know, hey, my business past, you never know what could come up. And it doesn't need to be something like this. This could be something else that turns out to be, some other kind of situation. They don't want to ever be at the point where someone can stand up and say, all right, we need to get rid of them. And now suddenly it's open season. We can get rid of owners. Donald Sterling got out because that audio got out and there was nothing they could do. And the players said, we're not playing if he's an owner. And there was nothing Adam Silver could do. But this now, you see when things get covered up, so you can obscure it just enough where you can plausibly say, well, listen, we finished this and there's not going to be the support around a league to remove an owner. So those are my two big takeaways from this.
Yeah, but don't you think the most bizarre part of this is that Jerry Jones retained this guy, when you talk about loyalty, after the guy was accused of taking an upskirt of Jerry's own daughter?
Yeah. Look, Mark Cuban kept a known domestic abuser on staff in Dallas because I wanted to keep an eye on him. How do you keep an unsafe workplace for your employees? But this is what happens when there's not enough of a push. You're going to get it like this. But the Jerry Jones thing, yeah, that's just baffling on so many levels. This involved your daughter, and still you're keeping the guy around. I don't get how decisions are made sometimes, but you look at the upper levels of sports organizations, and you just shake your head and go, wow, that's like an above the rim game that I don't understand sometimes.
And by the way, the guy stuff, but somebody saw him on the live stream. I would guess it was a fan. This is another very odd. Fan accused him of taking the pictures upskirt of Jerry Jones's daughter because he said it was being broadcast live during draft day on a live stream. I mean, if that in fact happened, he says no. To have the ball to live extreme. I mean, that's the only thing that's more egregious than that is that legal analyst at CNN who was pleasuring himself on the. Do you remember that
Oh
story?
yeah. You got
Like,
yeah.
when
There's
going
like,
live, and people have such a nerve to be doing these insane things.
yeah, there's lots of Zoom things that I want to make sure that that when I turn the camera on, like my breakfast isn't here, or there's something that's. I mean, that's what I think of it. I don't want to sit now. All these other things, I'm like, what are you crazy? There's a camera on. There's a camera on. What's wrong with you? The camera's right in front of you.
Under this woman's skirt while I'm being
Oh.
brought to everybody's living room. Like, what?
I mean, look at Nick is really careful. He's got nothing Jets wise behind that we can see. He wants to, I played for the Broncos. Jets, I get it, but no Jets behind him. Look? He understands the whole thing with that.
Well, the whole idea is that you don't want guilty by association, right? And we live in a world of social media that we have to be really careful now. I mean, you brought it up. If we didn't get the live audio from Donald Sterling, would he still not be in place right now? But what we're seeing right now, what is taking place in sports, it's not just baseball, it's not just the NFL, it's happening in the NBA as well. We now have to start to question the culture of the league, the individuals who are the higher ups running these organizations. And no, you don't have plausible deniability where you can say, well, that happened in another department, that happened with subordinates underneath me. I didn't know what was going on. It's your job to know what's going on. And there's always someone who knows who's reporting it, or there's a fear that if you do report it, then you're going to lose your job. And to me, this is where the culture needs to change.
And it's the same thing with the K trial. I mean, that trial exposed a drug culture that was going on in Major League Baseball. We don't know the scope of it. But so now where do we go from here? Is the league going to start getting involved and investigating that? Is there a way to root that out? Or is it just going to be swept under the rug and the same patterns repeat themselves?
All right. Now, lastly, a piece of video this week that was kind of shocking. It's a bad optic. Doesn't make the Super Bowl winning quarterback look very good. But I know, you guys are hot on talking about this. The Matthew Stafford video in which a photographer who they asked to take the picture of Matthew Stafford and his wife, Kelly, fell off the stage at the Rams victory rally. And the video is really difficult to see because Stafford, who was standing there with a bottle of water, just immediately sees this woman fall and walks away. Like, Kelly, you take care of it. I don't want to get involved. You take care of this. Woman winds up with a fractured spine. And the good thing that they did, the Staffords, they're taking care of her medical bills. But that doesn't stop the optic of the coldness of Matthew Stafford. I'm disappointed as a human being that your first reaction when somebody falls is to, oh, hey, are you okay? And look, there's nothing they could have done for the woman to fall.
A photographer is in the hospital after taking a hard fall during the Rams rally yesterday. You can see Kelly Smiley standing on the stage, taking a picture of quarterback Matthew Stafford and his wife. You can see she falls off the podium and out of view. Kelly Smiley posted on Twitter saying she fractured her spine, and now friends are raising money to help cover her medical expenses and camera equipment. In the video, you see Stafford turn around and his wife rushes to the edge of the stage. Stafford has been facing criticism online for the way he reacted. Some people said he called for help as well.
With my wife, and my wife was also like, what is he doing? And I know we are all overcome with initial shock when someone falls down, but your natural human instinct is to go to help, not run away, and to watch Matthew Stafford, who just won the Super Bowl, go in the opposite direction. He acknowledged it by an expression on his face like, oh, that was bad, but he walked away. His wife, in that situation, for me, was more man than he was to actually go, or shall I say, more of a human being than he was to go assist to find out what happened. You're right. They would not have been able to prevent her from falling based on where she was standing, but there is the common decency to go and check on someone, and he didn't do it. So I'm really disappointed in Matthew Stafford, really disappointed.
I remember watching the Super Bowl, and they had this whole compelling, in-depth feature about his wife having a brain tumor and what that was like for the family. And I felt so much compassion for them naturally. Oh my gosh, this family's been through so much, you know, and and Stafford had to deal with this, and he's got, I think, 4 kids. Wow, what's that like to deal with 4 kids, and your wife's going through brain tumor, and you have to help treat her with recovery. I turned to my husband. I said, "How come this guy could take care of 4 kids, and you can't help me take care of 2?" And he said, "You really think Matt Stafford's taking care of those 4 kids? You don't think he's got a staff of people taking care of them?" But I was just like really endeared to him. I'm like, yeah, but regardless, this is such a difficult time, and they overcame so much. I was so happy to see him win. And then when I saw him walk away from the woman, and you saw the height of the stage, how far she dropped, I was like, oh my God, how could this is literally like seemed like a frat boy in college who was drunk and didn't care about anything going on around him.
Yeah, that was solely disappointing. And, once again, it's all about the optics. And that's why, Stafford and his wife decided to pay for the medical bills. That's the least that you can do, because you did not extend yourself to make sure that she was definitely okay. But this doesn't change anything for me from the way that I view Stafford right now. Before, I held him in such a high regard, a guy that was with the Detroit Lions organization. He was abused up as far as a physical standpoint. He went to the Rams, won a Super Bowl, but then this is the lasting image we see of him walking away on the stage while someone falls off. It's not good from an optic standpoint.
No, I just hope I never need his help, because if I fall down, he's not going to put his hand out to help me. He's going to say, okay, that's good. Maybe Kelly will come over and help me. That might be how it works.
So I have a little Deshaun Watson update, and then I think we can. But so apparently he's supposed to be deposed, I think, on the 24th. So what is that? Next week or the week after next? Look at my calendar.
24th is next Thursday, because I got the calendar right here next to me. Yeah.
But all the rumors now again, is he going to go to the Bucks? So what's the other team that's a contender right now?
The Vikings.
Yeah, Bucks and the Vikings. And I was thinking to myself, wow, Bruce Arians, like, he didn't have enough with Antonio Brown. Now he's going to take that baggage on. But I've heard that on the 21st, there's going to be a hearing, and I think they're going to try to delay the deposition. I don't know if the judge will allow that. And that will obviously make it easier for him to maybe get onto a team, because I think if the deposition comes out, it's going to be recorded, and it's probably going to be released as soon as the plaintiff's attorney can get it out in the media. And that's going to come under a lighter scrutiny. But they deposed Deshaun Watson's marketing manager, Brian Burney, and he was a lot in the news about all of this. And he was the guy that had said that one of Deshaun Watson's accusers was trying to extort money from Deshaun Watson. And I don't know if you remember, but when we broke the story at League of Justice that the FBI was investigating Deshaun Watson, and the next day his attorney confirmed it, but said, no, they're investigating an extortion attempt on Deshaun Watson. And that's what his side claimed. And so now they're saying that the marketing manager was the major witness to that alleged extortion attempt by one of his accusers. So the accuser's attorney deposed the guy, and apparently he said that he had done a recording with this woman, but on the recording, which they listened to in court, there was no mention of asking for $30,000 or whatever the number was. She was continuously asking for a copy of the non-disclosure agreement that Watson had her sign. And then Burney, apparently, according to the plaintiff's attorney, said during this deposition, they said, where'd you get the non-disclosure agreement that Watson was allegedly handing out to these women to sign? And Burney said the Texans gave it to him, that Deshaun Watson told him that the Texans had given him the non-disclosure agreement. So the question is, did the Texans know he was using this non-disclosure agreement, if in fact he was using one, to give to masseuses so he could continue to get all these massages and stop them from speaking out about what was going on? Had they just given him a non-disclosure agreement for something else? Like I remember Derek Jeter, there were rumors he used to have his dates sign non-disclosure agreements and send them on their way the next day with like a nice gift basket with all the memorabilia and everything, like, thanks for a great night. But the question is, like, did the Texans prepare it? If they did, why were they giving him non-disclosure agreements to hand out to people?
That's what you mentioned this, and that I think it's the opposite. If his deposition gets pushed, I don't think any team's going to trade for him until this gets solved. He can talk about and maybe the fact that we're getting some names of some teams out right now makes it seem like, okay, maybe there's a solution coming. But I don't know if there's any team that's going to trade for him unless they are 100% confident he's going to be cleared to play. Because they went through this whole year, and the Dolphins were supposedly close at some point during the season, but they didn't know when it was going to be solved. I mean, Nick, I can't see an NFL team saying, okay, yeah, here's 3 first-round picks, here's our future, not knowing if they're even going to have him to play at any point coming up this season.
No, Jason, you're absolutely right. Just put yourself in the owner's shoes or GM shoes. I am committing to a player that I'm not sure who's going to be available to me, and we're giving up future draft capital in order to acquire him. To me, that's a bad business deal, and that's a deal that gets you fired. So the idea of pushing this back, it only hurts Deshaun Watson in his camp, knowing as though, the new calendar year for the NFL, I believe, opens up March 6th, and everyone was hoping that all this information, a trial, there would be some form of decision by this point. If it is, in fact, pushed back, that's going to force a lot of teams that figured that they were in the pool for Deshaun Watson to go other places, which means that a guy like Kirk Cousins, who has received a lot of financial paychecks and he hasn't really come through, now he's going to become a top guy on teams' boards as far as looking to trade for him. And, Amy, you mentioned a couple of teams that were in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, but I did notice that you did not mention the Denver Broncos. And that's a guy that we definitely having our fingers crossed that they get through this whole legality issues and the Broncos can actually make a push for him, because if it's not Aaron Rodgers, we would gladly take a guy like Deshaun Watson because we're not really sure what Drew Lock is here.
I'd go get Kirk Cousins. He's the same guy as Matthew Stafford. I mean, at least on the field. Maybe he would help you up if he saw you fall. But he's the same quarterback. 30 touchdowns, 4,500 yards, 10 interceptions. You've watched 2 quarterbacks now leave their previous teams in the last 2 years and go win Super Bowls. So Kirk Cousins to me would be the guy. He'd be the next Matthew Stafford. Oh,
no,
you know what,
Jason? No, listen. Matthew Stafford, I think, is a notch above Kirk Cousins in so many different ways. When we look at Kirk Cousins, 1 playoff victory, the 3-year deal was $93 million. And you look at what happened when he was in with the Washington football team. That coaching staff was fired. And on that coaching staff was Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, and Matt LaFleur. Mike Shanahan is no longer in the league, and those other 3 guys are now head coaches. And then you look at what he did in Minnesota. Everyone got fired. Coach Zimmer fired. Rick Spielman's fired. And is having a 7-22 record against playoff caliber teams. Come on, Jason. We know you're a fantasy football guy, and we love our fantasy numbers, but we love W's even more. So I'll say no with Kirk Cousins.
Wow. All right. Amy, you got some stuff going up on the website later on today?
Yeah, and someone was asking me about the Trevor Bauer saga I see here in the chat, knowing if he's going to play again. That's another play we have a mystery on. I have an article on leagueofjustice.com about that. He already missed the majority of last season, so we don't know if there's going to be a suspension yet. There were no criminal charges brought. He won his hearing where there was no permanent restraining order against him. There's literally no legal action. Doesn't mean that MLB can't suspend him, but if they did, I think they would probably make some sort of an agreement to make it retroactive, credit him for time served. Maybe he'd take a hit to the pocket, and then he'd be eligible to start next season. Though there's a strong possibility if he is issued a suspension that his legal team tries to fight that. That's a possibility too. So, I don't think it's going to be so easy for MLB based on the circumstances with his the criminal investigation not resulting in anything. For them to just dole out like this 80 or 100 game suspension and not have a really strong fight from his team on that side. So I think ultimately they'll probably come to an agreement on something very small, if at all.
So for more on this and obviously the other stories we talked about, leagueofjustice.com, Amy Dash, Jason Smith, and the anti-Kirk Cousins, Nick Ferguson. We'll talk to you guys next time on the next show.
Thanks, guys.